Hi friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. Today we are here to talk about some 5-star predictions I had and whether or not I predicted correctly. A number of months ago, I would have to look up when, I will link the original video down below, I chose these 5 books as possible 5-star reads. So we're going to go through and see what I thought about these. Did I love them? Did I not? I have ranked them in a little stack from least favorite to favorite. I did pretty good this round, and 3 out of the 5 are actually 5-star reads. But there were 2 that didn't quite live up to what I had expected of them. And this first one is such a bummer. I am very, very disappointed that I did not love Jeffersons Sons by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. This is the first book of hers that I have not loved. I just read this in August, finally. And honestly, I picked this up and set it down many, many times because it did not draw me in at all at the beginning. By the end, I was invested. It did end up getting 3 stars for me, but this is, like I said, my least favorite of hers. It is a historical fiction. She's written other historical fiction that I loved. The War That Saved My Life and The War I Finally Won were fabulous. This one, not so much, in my opinion. It's set in the America, and Thomas Jefferson, right after his presidency, is the time period. And he is known to have had relations with one of his enslaved women, Sally Hemings. Whether or not they were in love is something we will never really know. This book did portray her as having a lot of love for him. However, she was enslaved and never set free by him. So, yeah. Take from that what you will. But in this, we follow some of his children, or their children together. In particular, the oldest, Beverly. And all of these kids know that Thomas Jefferson is their father, but they're never allowed to really talk about it, even though everyone kind of knows. And I just felt like... So one of the reasons I love reading historical fiction is that you learn about a time period in history through the lives of the people portrayed in the novel. I felt like this was way heavy on the education side and lacking on the story side of things. I was not drawn into Beverly and Harriet and Madison and Eston, all of these children of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. I wasn't drawn into their story really at all until maybe close to the end. But I felt like the purpose of this book was to educate about what was life like for different types of enslaved people at the time. The struggles between knowing that your father was this important white man and yet seeing some of your friends and other people who live with you on the estate how they are being treated. Especially those who, there was 2 instances where someone tried to run away and the consequences of that, which were horrific. And then also learning about Monticello and how in debt Thomas Jefferson, like the further and further into debt that he went, how the whole estate just gave off this impression of being well-to-do and prosperous, and yet the reality was that it wasn't doing very well at all. And the consequences of that as Thomas Jefferson got older and closer to his death. Was he going to free these kids like he told Sally Hemings that he would, or was he not? So there was a little bit of that tension towards the end. It was interesting, but definitely not a 5-star read. I was not drawn in from the beginning. I did not love it at all, sadly. So I gave it 3 stars. The one thing that I will say is I live relatively close to Monticello. It's an hour away from here. And it does make me want to go there and actually do the tour and all of that. I've walked the grounds a little bit. There's a walking path that you can like park at the bottom and walk up the 2 miles to Monticello and back down. I've done that a number of times, but I've never actually gone to do the tour and all of the things that you can do there. So it does make me want to do that now that I've learned a lot more about it from this book. So that's positive. But yeah, this was such a bummer for me. This is an out of print book. And so I just gave it away recently, but I know other people have liked it a lot more than I have. It wasn't a big hit for me. And I was very hopeful because I've loved her in the past. The other book that did not receive 5 stars for me, I read in June, and that was The London House by Catherine Ray. I have a goal this year of reading all the Catherine Ray books that I own. This is a historical novel by Catherine Ray, and she typically writes more contemporary. So she was branching out of her comfort zone a little bit. And I do think it was an interesting read. I was captivated by the story. I was invested. I did end up giving it 4 stars. Ever since doing my reading retreat with my booktube besties, Sarah, Lindsay, and Amanda, we had a breakout session about historical fiction, and Gloria is from Gloria Thompson's channel. She talked about historical fiction and some of the tropes that she doesn't like, and I feel like this book had all of them. So there's the dual perspective, and current day young woman finds out a secret about her family and has to go try to figure out what that is. And then that's what the past timeline is. And that's exactly what this is. So we start out this book with Caroline receiving a call from an old college fling, best friend, Matt, who is a historian and is writing this article. And in the process of his research, discovered some things about Caroline's great aunt and possibly grandmother. And she's able to persuade him to kind of wait on the article. She travels to their London estate, their London house, to try to find out the truth and what really happened, because she doesn't believe the things that he's uncovered in his research. So she wants to see if she can find anything in the house and in London that might help discount whatever it is that he thinks he found. He comes to help her, and they find in the attic of their London house these letters between the 2 sisters, her grandmother, Caroline's grandmother, and the great aunt. So apparently the great aunt is potentially has been labeled as a Nazi supporter and possibly even having a relationship with a Nazi soldier. And this is the big news that Caroline just doesn't believe at all. So they find these letters and they learn about the grandmother and the great aunt and what happened between them. They were very close. And then you can tell in the letters things happened that caused them to not be very close anymore. And in the midst of this, in the current day timeline, Caroline's parents have had a disagreement. I don't remember if they're divorced or just separated, but there's a lot of family drama that I didn't particularly care for as much as the past storyline. Of course, I typically like the past storyline way better than the present day storyline. But yeah, so it was an interesting read. I was invested as I was reading it. I do love the letters aspect of it, and like learning about the past through actual letters that the grandmother and the great aunt had written to each other. I do like the letters aspect of it. I didn't care for the Matt Caroline storyline, and I did like that there was some restoration between different members of the family who had been a little bit estranged. I did like that because I always love some restoration and reconciliation. And that's really all I have to say about it. It was 4 stars, not 5. I enjoyed it, but it was not my favorite Catherine Ray. I'll say that. The last 3 were 5-star reads for me. Yay! So the first one, and I kind of ranked them in order of how, like, in looking at this pile, how I like them. So the first one is The Rose Code by Kate Quinn. This is my 3rd Kate Quinn, I think, and I just love her historical fiction. All 3 have been World War II, about a little bit of a different aspect. In this one, we follow 3 women who end up working at Bletchley Park, being code breakers or working on teams at Bletchley Park. These 2 women meet at the train station on the way there to this new job that they don't really know much about. And they end up billeting or staying in the home of the 3rd girl, who's very overprotective. Mother doesn't barely let her go out, but this girl is super good at puzzles and things. And so the other 2 girls kind of help her to get a job at Bletchley Park. So these 3 friends, Beth, Asla, and Mab, we kind of just follow their life working at Bletchley Park in the midst of World War II. But we also we see them a few years later, and at the very beginning, we kind of see them a few years after their time together at Bletchley Park, and we know that they're very estranged from each other. They have not been speaking, and we don't know why, but a letter is sent to 2 of them from the 3rd one with a code in it, and they have to come back together. One of them has been put into an asylum. There was some betrayal going on there. So there's this mystery of how come one of these girls ended up in an asylum? How did she get there? Who betrayed her? Was it one of the other 2 girls? Was it somebody else at the park? Like, who and how, what happened. I was very invested in that aspect of it. I loved the friendship that built between these three girls, and I really just loved learning about Bletchley Park and what it was like during this time and the different types of codes that they were working on. And I did, when I finished this one, I did get online and do a little bit of a Google deep dive into Bletchley Park, looking at pictures and learning a little bit more about it. I definitely would be interested in reading more about code breakers and more about Bletchley Park in particular. But yeah, I think Kate Quinn did a great job. The one thing I didn't love in here was the different romantic aspects of it. Each of the three women kind of have their men in their lives, and I didn't really care about that as much. It didn't distract from the story really, but I just I cared more about these three women and all of the work that they were doing, and then this mystery of what happened to break them apart. The whole way through I'm like waiting to see what happened. Like they seem to be getting along, and I don't know. I loved that mystery aspect of it as well. What I love about Kate Quinn is that she really draws me into her story very well. And she's a little bit grittier than some other historical fiction writers. I don't know. I just feel like it's not sugary. It's not sweet. It definitely gets into the nitty gritty of behaviors and mentalities and attitudes and events, and doesn't gloss over things. And I always love that about Kate Quinn. So The Rose Code, 5 stars. Read this one in June and loved it. Another June read. I was killing it in June. I was doing good. This is the third one. I think I read London House in June too. I read 3 of these in June. The third one I read in June that I loved was I Must Betray You by Ruta Sepetys. I love Ruta Sepetys. She is a YA historical fiction writer, and I've loved almost everything I've read by her. This one takes place in the 1980s, late 1980s, in Romania. So we're in the midst of the Cold War. Ceausescu, I can't say it well, and his wife are in power, dictators in Romania, communist dictators. And it is a very tense society. And I could really feel that when reading this book. So in this era, the Ceausescus and the communist government, people were not really allowed to think for themselves at all. And everyone potentially could be spying on everyone else. Different people were often called to tell about what their neighbors were doing and saying, and called upon to become spies. When you know that everybody around you could be an informant, it really breeds this attitude of isolation and distrust of everything and everyone. And that really could be felt in here, that isolation. Even the people within your own family, they didn't even feel free to speak openly in their own homes. They didn't know if there was bugs in there or if family member, they didn't know who was telling who anything. So everything felt secret and hush hush, and it really feeds into this isolation. But Christian is our main character. He's 17. He wants to be a writer. He wants to kind of bust out of this whole system, but he doesn't trust anybody. He starts to have kind of an interest in one of the girls in his school, but he doesn't know even if he can trust her or her family. But then he is approached one day about becoming an informant himself, and he has to decide what he's going to do. Is he going to be willing to tell on the people in his life, or is he going to work with others kind of in this underground at the beginning stages of a revolution? I really thought that Ruta Sepetys did a great job with atmosphere, and number one, really letting me know about Romania in this time period and in a communist environment, what that was like for these people. I really could feel it. The atmosphere was crazy good. I really loved this book. I love her short chapters. I love the characters that she develops. I just loved it so much, and I gave it 5 stars. And the final book I'm going to talk about is probably my favorite of the stack because it really made me cry. And I love a book that makes me cry. And that is The 100 Years of Lenny and Margot by Marianne Cronin. I did give this one 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. I feel like I talked about it a lot when I first read it in May. And yet I still look at it and it makes me so happy. Lenny and Margot is the story of 2 women who are in a terminal ward in a hospital. Lenny is 17 years old and Margot is 83. We start out meeting Lenny, and she kind of knows her way around the hospital. I really loved the scenes where she met with the chaplain, the priest who works in the hospital and the questions that she asked him about his job and about faith and about life and dying and why these things are happening to her. They felt like real questions a 17-year-old would have who was in this situation. But then Lenny ends up in this art class for the octogenarians in the terminal ward. And she meets Margot. And together, Lenny and Margot decide to start this project where they're going to make one piece of art for each of their 100 years. Because together they make 100 years. Hence the title. Throughout creating together, they tell a story to go along with each of the pieces of art that they make. And so we kind of almost get this other perspective, this other timeline where Margot is sharing some of her history with Lenny. And we get to learn her love story, and we get to learn a little bit about history of what are some of the events that she went through in her life. And through it all, their friendship just really grows super strong. I cried a couple different times. And I love books that have the theme of life and love and friendship and grief. And this definitely had all of that. It had so much heart. I would say that it's a little bit more character-based because we're really just hearing them tell stories. So there are stories, but it's not very plot and action-driven. But don't let that scare you away if you're not a character-based person because, well, if you're like me and the characters are so wonderful and you want to spend more time with them, then it doesn't matter as much. Yeah, I really loved this one very much. And I gave it 5 stars. And it's a beautiful cover. So I did pretty good overall with this round of 5-star predictions. I had 3 5 stars, The Rose Code, I Must Betray You, and Lenny and Margot. A 4-star of London House, and a 3-star Jeffersons Sons. So not too bad. Compared to my 5-star round that I did with the BookTube Besties for Christmas Book Exchange books, that was a hot mess of a 5-star prediction round. So I'm pretty pleased with these ones. But I would love to hear your thoughts. Have you read any of those books? Did you agree with my thoughts on them? Did you have the same ratings or different ratings? You feel free to disagree kindly in the comments. Yeah, let's chat down in the comments. I always love talking with you down there. And that is going to be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out with me. I look forward to talking with you in another video very soon. Bye.